It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. I am Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And Logan, we survived draft weekend, and we survived to talk about it. Yes, more draft talk.
Yeah, more draft talk.
Which sounded way snarkier than I wanted to be. No, this is fun because I actually genuinely feel like we learned a lot this weekend. We learned a lot about, I think, what they think of some of the current roster. I think we learned a lot about kind of this philosophy overall and how they want to build this team. And we learned that through the data points of the human beings that they picked to be Washington Commanders and the things that they said, which, by the way, the calls and getting to see those on video, just amazing content. Always really cool how they are able to capture that. It's really cool when they can blend both sides of the conversation because there was a camera in the draft picks homes too. But seeing what Peters and Quinn said to these guys upon drafting them, it just reinforced, I think, our biggest takeaway from the weekend. Certainly mine. I don't want to speak for you, but Logan, when you look at kind of what we learned this weekend before we dive into the actual players themselves, what'd you learn?
So I think for me, this is like, I don't want to, the most like get on base draft I've seen in a long time, which I really appreciate, right? It's your first year as a GM. It's your first year as head coach, like get on base. And like, I think, one of the things you look at every single one of their prospects, I'm talking from Jaden Daniels to, who was the last guy they picked?
Jean Baptiste.
Jean Baptiste. Like they're all like captains. They've all got great leadership. They all play super hard. And like they all have those things, those intangible qualities that you can bet on to like be part of your roster and culture moving forward. And I just love it. And again, like as a plus, you get some really good football players in there. So like, I don't know, like it's just so interesting because I consume a lot of draft content, pre-draft. I consume a lot of draft content, post-draft. And one of the things I really, really wish was kind of driven home is that like everybody's board is a little bit different. So like whatever draft grade you see for the Commanders, like it's kind of irrelevant in my opinion because like we have no idea. I mean, we do now that we've seen kind of like the kind of guys they were selecting, like where their evaluations were. And like I just wanted to point this out. So like a lot of people are like, like Luke McCaffrey in the third round, like that seems a little bit rich. They might not have had another receiver remaining on their draft board outside of him. Like he might have been the highest rated guy. Think about this. Like, so you got Johnny Wilson, right? Very uber talented guy, but there's question about his work ethic, his professionalism. Javon Baker, same thing. Devontae Walker, can he catch the football? Same type of thing. Like you just go down the list for like kind of that big body, big slot type guy. And you're like, there's not that many people that would fit that mold. And so like, to me, it makes perfect sense why you take him in the third because he's got all the stuff you want. He's new to the position. He's learning it. He works his tail off. He's got the professional pedigree. He's a guy that you can bet on to A, get better, and B, literally do whatever you want him to do. And he's going to give it 1,000%. Like you watch his film, he's pouring his heart out for you. So like, I think that's one thing that when you look at the draft process, like a guy like Johnny Wilson, who's a freak of freaks and a once in a lifetime physical, representation, like he might not be in the NFL in 2 years, but I guarantee you Luke McCaffrey's going to be in the NFL in 2 years. Like just because of his approach and because of the physicality he brings. And I really think that's what they did with every single pick across the board. They just picked guys that had really, really high floors, really, really high football character. And it really makes a lot of sense as to why they made some of the decisions in the draft that they did.
Yeah, I think it goes even beyond that, to be honest. Like I think there are characteristics that they identified as what we want a commander to be. And physicality is the biggest one to me. And competitive, like physicality, which embodies a competitiveness and a toughness, both physically and mentally, that you see when you watch these guys play. Like you watch, and it starts, as you said, with Jaden. Like it's one of the first things that you and I said about Daniels when we watched him back in January, like our first bite at the apple in quarterback evaluation. You're like, there's obvious production. He's got, this great deep ball that he's throwing to these stud receivers. But the thing that like really jumps off the tape, the thing that makes you go, I want this dude, is the competitiveness that he plays with and his willingness to throw his body around, the never say die attitude, the playmaking ability and gotta have it situations. Like he comes through time and time again. And you see that. Jer'Zhan Newton, like that dude competes his tail off, which, at his size, it's always funny to me. Yeah, he's 6'2", 285, 290, undersized, only in the NFL. But like you see it with an approach to his tape. And I think on down the list, like, yeah, they have captains, so there's a leadership element and kind of a professionalism or responsibility to it. But I think physical toughness and competitiveness are the traits that they centered. And then everything else is off of that in terms of skill set. And then it comes down to, like, as coaches, and I know this is the big question, obviously, with Daniels, because this is the question with any rookie quarterback. This is not unique to Jaden. Is like, what's your plan for that player? And I think that's going to be really fun to watch and something that we'll talk about here in the next half hour after we get out of the draft philosophy of, like, what do they actually want to do with, for instance, since you mentioned him, a Luke McCaffrey?
Yeah, no, I think I think you bring up a great point there. And the main thing is, like, you want to bet on guys that are gonna pour it out for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's been so many guys that you've covered, that I've played with, that I've covered when watching this team, where football is important to them, but they're not gonna die for it. And I feel like you got 7 guys, 8 guys in this draft, and they're going to die for the game. You know what I mean? Like, they are invested. And you say, like, how do you know that? Well, obviously they have more information than we do in terms of the ability to interview and interact with these players. But, like, when you watch these guys on film, like, that's how they play. Like, you mentioned Jer'Zhan Newton. Like, he is running to the football. He's 295 pounds, almost 300 pounds, and he is running to the ball every single time. And you can't say that about T'Vondre Sweat or Ruka Rororo or some of these other guys that went really high. Like, he is pouring it out for this organization. Mike Sanders is maybe the most enjoyable defensive player to watch in the draft because of that kind of top flight, like, competitiveness. Now, that's coupled with great football instincts, and things that make him really special in terms of ball production, all those different things. But, like, he's like 185 pounds and he's fit and runs like he's a linebacker, and like that not everyone does that. So it takes tremendous physical courage. Luke McCaffrey, I saw his helmet fall off more times watching his tape than any other player, because he's just getting straight lit up over the middle of the field. Talk about wanting him to block, he'll block for you. Like, it's all there for you. And all those guys are like that. Even Brandon Coleman, like, he plays with a violence. And you can tell he's one of those guys that just relishes the physical elements of the game. And those are the guys I want to bet on, right? I want to bet, just as an example, like Wes Schweitzer. I know he wasn't the greatest football player in Commanders history, but I knew I could bet on him because I know he was going to pour everything into getting better each and every day. And there's a higher likelihood that player makes it because of the work ethic, the physical toughness, the football character, and then the leadership qualities that all of these guys have. So I think it's really interesting, like, to hear people talk about, they didn't address the tackle need or whatever. And, like, I just want to call attention to the fact that, like, all of those tackles that we were talking about in the second round, the Sumatayas, the Patrick Pauls, the Roger Rosengartners, even to a certain extent, the Kirian Amadiji from Yale, like, were all projection plays with big questions about, like, kind of, I don't want to say football character, because I think they're all good guys, but just in terms of, like, the consistency that they were playing the game with, And they were all projections, right? And you look at Brendan Coleman as an example, along the offensive line, like, I'm very confident he will find a home, whether it's at guard or at tackle. I think him playing at tackle is an interesting projection, but the point is they all are like that. McGee, the guy from Temple, like, when you watch him play, like, he's an undersized linebacker, but plays his heart out, man. They're all like that. And I think that's something that's really cool about this process and watching these guys. And you can tell that that's how they put their board together, their big board. It was like, we want good football players, but the deciding factor isn't going to be height, weight, speed. It's not going to be traits. It's going to be this intangible element, and all these guys have it. So I think it's just a really nice first draft for this organization, and all these guys are going to, I think, not all of them, because, like, statistically that's insane, but right, they're going to be contributors, even day one, to a cultural development here, which I think is good value.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it feels like they took year one draft and said, we are going to establish who we are. And it is, by the way, with their free agent class as well. They know that they cannot build a Super Bowl contender in year one. They had too far to go, and the players that they needed to be available at certain situations from a draft capital standpoint and certainly in free agency were not there, because that's almost never the case. Like, good luck finding a free agent class where you get to sign the exact right guys and then your draft capital matches up. And by the way, your roster was good enough to start with that you can build a Super Bowl contender from nothing in a year. Like, Houston got real close going from terrible to playoff, and they have their quarterback of the future and all that kind of stuff. And they weren't up to the Chiefs level. Like, it was obvious in the playoffs, like the teams, once they got there, like other teams had their number, and you have to do a little bit of learning and a little bit of growing and some development and continuing adding pieces over multiple years. And even then, like, one thing that's kind of underrated about the Texans is they made a couple moves a couple years ago that's helped start building some foundation. Some of those pieces carried over, even though last year was year one for them. I don't know how many pieces are carrying over from the previous administration to what Washington is doing. I think Quan could be an interesting one. Obviously, Terry, multiple administrations. Like, there are some for sure, but some of the key contributors in Houston and some of the guys that they relied upon to do certain things were already in place when D'Amico and everybody got in there. So that's another like interesting thing to note. But back to Washington and kind of what they're trying to build, I would be hard pressed to think that, 3 years from now, we don't talk about the core of this team being guys like Mike Sanders still, and that they have a foundation. We've used that term a lot this offseason, that you need, if you're going to build something, the foundation has to be strong. And this kind of completed their building of the foundation going into year one of Peters, Quinn, etc.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think when you look back at San Francisco in 2017, like, that's what they did. They brought in some high character free agents. They kind of cut the fat, and they made sure that draft class was very solid from a character, compete, physicality standpoint. And I think that's ultimately what you're doing here. It's a foundational year. I do think there is some upside play because you have a young quarterback who could be pretty special. So I do think that is a huge thing to consider here, like much in the same way it was for Houston. But obviously, that's the exception, not the rule. But I think there is some opportunity to kind of do some more stuff here than just kind of get on base or be conservative here. But I think that's exactly right. And then once you've kind of figured out who you are as a team and the leadership's there, you can start bringing in other pieces in free agency, being more aggressive in terms of, maybe riskier character guys in the draft. But I think it's so important in that first year to be like, this is what and who we are, and this is what we're going to be. And that's something I really appreciate, honestly, about Dan and Adam and the whole process is just like, hey, man, we're not going to do anything crazy. We're going to bring in quality football. We're going to bring in quality people, good football players, and we're going to kind of figure it out as we go in terms of how to best allocate them in terms of our team. But those are the priorities, and I think that's brilliant. And again, like, I go back to draft process and draft evaluation, and the one thing that I always go back to is like, do they love football? Yes or no? And it's really hard to determine that. It's really hard to, like, when you're watching film to determine that, but there are signs. And when you watch all these guys, the signs are there. And so I think, like, that's, again, you've kind of mitigated risk as much as possible in this really complicated, crazy draft process. And so while it may not be, they didn't address every single possible need in the draft, or, this guy wasn't on my board. Like, I love listening to the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, right? Those guys do a fantastic job. But, they're like, oh, this guy wasn't on my board until this point, and so this is a little bit of a reach. It's like, dude, like, you have no idea what the personal elements of these players are. And so how do you kind of flesh out that evaluation? But I definitely think, like, to kind of flesh this point out, that they identified football character as the number one thing they wanted to do. Football character and just humanity, right? And guys who are going to work hard. And if I'm going to bet on traits in the draft, like, that is the one thing that you can consistently bet on, because that guy's going to always get better. I think a perfect example is Ryan Kerrigan. Maybe not the most, like, physically gifted player, compared to like Robert Quinn at the time, but you draft Ryan Kerrigan because he's going to work every day like a dog and get better and pour it out for the team and be an excellent pro, and so that's where talent and hard work kind of meet in this weird confluence, and you get a really awesome opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, if you get talent, character, and very little risk on both, like, that's when you get like Rome Odunze, you get a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
Right? Once we're getting into the second round, especially, like, you're going to have to sacrifice somewhere, whether it's consistency of play, consistency of character, upside of one or the other. And, like, they chose that their risk was going to be on the talent, that they were not going to miss on people. And I think that is probably a better bet all in all long term, because I also don't know that it doesn't wind up netting you a star at some point. Like, if you bet on the person because you think they're going to put in the work, they might develop into, especially if you have good coaches who know how to use a certain skill set and they have something special in their athletic profile. You could develop into something. And we're going to talk about like Sanat later. And so we'll save the longer discussion, but like Adam Peters might see him as like the next Kyle Juszczyk type. And that Kyle Juszczyk's a Pro Bowler. Kyle Juszczyk's a really useful player. And I would guarantee you when Kyle Juszczyk was coming out of college, no one was like, oh yeah, Pro Bowler, difference maker for a Super Bowl caliber team. But like, that's the thing is you bet on the right things and you get creative and understand who a player is and you use them the right way. And you might just wind up with your second, third, fourth rounders becoming Pro Bowlers like they did regularly in San Francisco because they knew what they were doing. And I think that versus like, oh, here's a talent that everyone sees. We just have to harness it. And, you know, good luck with that. We've seen that fail a million times. And not that we haven't seen it succeed too, because sometimes whether it's a maturation that happens, whether it's just a misread of the character, whatever the reason is, they do a good job of massaging it out and they actually, you know, get someone the resources they need to be the best person they can be that they didn't have before, whatever the reason is. It can work both ways. But I think during this foundational phase, I agree with you. Like betting on this side of it or taking a risk on the other side of it is certainly feels to be the right move for this team right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, like, again, I'll go back to, when the Commanders played San Francisco last year, they're really well coached and they're very talented. They're tough, man. And there's something about a game like football where if you're violent and physical, it'll cover up a lot of stuff for you, you know? And I think like that's kind of, again, when you're laying the foundation, let's get a bunch of tough physical sons of guns in here that love playing ball. They're going to get better each and every year. We'll figure out the best way to use them as we go, as we figure out our defensive and offensive identities. And you just can't go wrong with having tough football players, you know? As much as people want to say, oh, I want Xavier Worthy, who runs a 4.21, like I've seen a lot of fast football players not be good, you know? But like the thing about Pierre Garçon, man, you know, like how tough and physical he was, like there's something there for you. And even like Deshaun, not the most overtly physical guy, but like to compete, you know, like to get after it. And I think there's something there too, you know? So I think that, again, and knowing what they all do well is the other thing. So I'm really excited. Again, it might not be the flashiest names of all time, but I think it fits with kind of the directive set out. Seems like a good way to lay a foundation. And they're not going to Super Bowl this year probably, but I think it's a good starting spot. And I think they did a good job in terms of sticking to the script. You know, how many times since we've been covering the team have we heard, oh, we're going to value this stuff, and they draft a guy and you're like, that's not that guy. That doesn't fit with what you've been doing. And I think just having a clarity of vision through the entirety of the draft is a nice, refreshing, is nice.
All right, let's get to the players themselves, Logan. And Adam Peters was stunned that he had the ability to pick Johnny Newton, number 36. I can't say I was stunned only because there was a foot injury that caused some concern, a Jones fracture, which is a really serious foot injury. But Newton ultimately there for the Commanders. They take him at 36. Based off the tape alone, it seems like a great value. There's some people that thought he was neck and neck for Byron Murphy, who some people had as the best defensive player in this draft. So to get a guy who's that good at 36 seems like a great pick. But for those that are wondering more about Johnny Newton, what did the Commanders just draft?
Yeah, so, in terms of my evaluation, again, we just talked about how that's kind of like, not worth anything because it's about the Commanders' evaluation. But, he's a guy that I liked a lot. I had Byron Murphy ahead of him by a margin. I had Byron Murphy in that kind of, what is that, 12 to 20 range, in my opinion. And then Jer'Zhan was probably 25 to 35, and so I did have him as a first round player, and I just thought he had to go to the right situation. So when he was there, I was like really surprised because I think when you watch him, he uses his hands well. He plays really hard. He's got a good feel. He gets a lot of, I don't say junk pressures, but he just plays so hard. He like falls into stuff, which is awesome. He pursues the football well. He doesn't have like this elite bend. He's not elite twitchy, but like it's really, really good, And I think like when you kind of package it all together, how hard he plays, the hand usage, the kind of pass rush feel, coupled with like the plus athleticism. Again, it's not plus, but it's pretty good. I just see a guy like I'm really excited to see how they use him on the defensive front. Like, I just think about last year when Jer'Zhan rushed from the outside a little bit and how that created so many mismatches along the offensive line. Like, is that a guy that can also do that? Can you line him up over the tackle, get a bigger body type out there, compress the pocket, and use these three kind of special players, not just as rotationals and kind of like hockey subbing each other, but as a way to kind of create mismatches along the front? I think so. And I think, like, again, you wanted to get better, more dynamic pass rush. I think he does this for you. And again, I think the floor is very, very high with him because of how hard he plays and because of his leadership. And again, like, he's a guy that's going to try to get better. He's got a chip on his shoulder now, right? Because he wasn't taken in the first round. It sounded like he thought he should have been taken in the first round. So I'm really excited. And I'm also excited because I do feel like this defensive staff here now is going to have a more creative way to develop these players and a more creative way to deploy the players. And so I can't wait to see with a talent like Johnny Newton, like, where this ends up going.
Yeah, a lot of people. I did a couple of hits with our hosts and everything over the weekend, and the first question is like, "Well, what does it mean for John Allen?" And they play the same position. There are three techniques, like on a baseline level. It doesn't mean they can't play together. You can creatively use those guys together for sure. Whether that's 3 down fronts or whether that's lining up double 3 tech. That's something that some teams have done recently. Create some different angles, some different ways to attack certain gaps, whether it's run, pass, etc. All that kind of stuff. So there's ways you can do it. But I think on an even more fundamental level, like, John Allen is getting obviously up there in age, and he battled an injury all of last year. It'd be really nice to not have to play John Allen 85% of snaps, which it felt like you had to do the past bunch of years. Yeah, you're paying him a bunch of money to play a lot. And I'm not saying John Allen needs to play half the snaps, but dang, it'd be really nice to be able to sub him out a little bit more to get the best of John Allen. And then, yeah, in a couple of years, like, he's going to be, I can't believe this already, but like, John Allen's damn near 30 years old. Contractually, if they want to, just the facts of the case are he's got no guaranteed money left after this year, so they can move on if they want to. But I think even more on that short-term Logan, like, the ability to get more creative and maybe kick John outside as a rusher sometimes to potentially just not have him on the field as much. It's not necessarily, there's John Allen's replacement. Long term, realistically, yeah, he probably is. But it's also a John Allen, like, current maintenance plan that gets me excited about what John Allen can do this year, nevertheless what Jer'Zhan Newton can do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, one of the things when I talk to some of my defensive line clients that are around the NFL, and just in terms of how they approach utilization along the defensive line, it's like, oh yeah, we want to, like, this team that I'm with, they want to rotate as much as possible. Like, one of the major advantages for the defensive line is that you don't have to play every snap. Offensive linemen do. So why don't I get the fresher, more productive, more explosive player out there as much as possible? And again, like, I agree with you. I think one of the reasons John's production waned a little bit last year was because he was just playing too much. Like, he can't be the best version of himself when you're on the field all the time, right? That goes for a lot of positions except for O-line. So I would say, like, having this piece in there, again, I think Ridgeway's a good player. We haven't seen Phil kind of develop, but having just another piece in there that says, hey, John, we don't have to, like, here, we'll give you a blow on first and second down, right? We'll let the young buck in there and play the 3 technique, or John Ridgway's in there, and just giving them more opportunity to keep their legs fresh, take the pounding off their body. I think that's 100% the right approach. And so I do think it makes the football team better in the short term. I think it makes John Allen better in the short term. And also, is it a contingency plan moving forward? I have no idea. Jer'Zhan Newton, as much as I like him as a player, might just be a guy moving forward. And that's fine. You need guys, right? He might just be a guy. But he also could develop into someone that you say, hey, we can replace John Allen with this player. So I'm not gonna speculate on John Allen's future, because John Allen is shown.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know. John Allen might not be that good in this scheme. He might be the best version that we've ever seen. Like, we don't know.
We don't know. And so I think, like, yes, is that a possibility? 100%. But I also think, like, in the immediate impact of this player is awesome. Right?
Yeah.
We get to rotate our guys more. We get to be more creative with rush packages. We added another explosive playmaker, hopefully, and we'll see how it goes from there. So I 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I don't know. Like, I've seen guys get drafted that are supposed to be the second coming of whatever, and that's just not who they are. That's just not who they are as a player. That's not who they are as a person, and you have to kind of adjust accordingly. So, we'll see what goes on. I hope the best for Johnny. I think he's going to be an excellent player. Hope the best for John. I think them working together is going to be great for the team. So,
yeah, it's going to be really fun to watch how creative they want to get. Mike Sanders still is the next pick that they made. And by the way, we'll probably get through the second and third rounders today, and we'll look at some of the late round guys in the UDFAs later in the week on the show. But Mike Sanders still guy that I definitely had circled because of the character reasons. And, we talked about this the other day, but like Tirico, who knows the Michigan program really, really well, came on our show, and I was like, who's of all these guys, especially, Coulson, Sanders still, these guys that you're looking at second, third round, is there one that stands out as a Dan Quinn guy, as a guy in Mike Tirico who lives in Ann Arbor but has covered the NFL, and Dan Quinn for, as long as Dan Quinn's been in the NFL. And he's like, Mikey is your guy. And sure enough, I think you see it on tape. You watch the press conference, which I did, the conference call that he had with our colleagues in the local media, and like just his personality, the personableness of him, but also the competitive drive. Like it's all there, plain as day. And I think this is also a really intriguing pick, Logan, because to me, this answers one of the questions I've had, which is what do they think of Quan Martin? Or how are they going to use Quan Martin? And it would make sense to me that if they're drafting Mike Sanders still in the second round, Quan's going to be playing a good bit of safety this year, and Sanders still is going to wind up being their nickel guy. And then you obviously have Chin to play with as well as kind of that big nickel, et cetera, in terms of the machinations of the secondary.
Yeah, and I think like when you look at Dallas and what they did such a good job with kind of those, multi-safety sets, kind of position, almost like the basketball thing, positionless basketball. You know what I mean? Like are you a linebacker? Are you a safety? Where do you fit? Are you in the post? Are you in the box? Are you a run support player? Are you blitzing? And you've got guys in Quan and Sanders still. We'll see. Obviously, like with the young guys, I'm always a little bit tentative to like anoint them as the second coming. Like his film's amazing, but we got to see it at this level. But then you got like your Percy Butlers, your four, like these kind of bigger body athletes that can kind of do a bunch of different stuff. You mentioned Jeremy Chin as well. Like I think it's going to be really cool. That's one of the things I'm excited now for the offseason is just how do you use that player, that skill set in conjunction with Quan, who is arguably one of our better defenders, not arguably, was one of the better defenders on the team last year, especially down the stretch. So like Quan, I think, is an interesting guy because he played outside, he played inside, he played safety. That was one of the alluring parts of him when he came here from Illinois last year. So does he bump outside? Does he come back inside? Is he a box player? He's the Buffalo nickel. Like does, Mike Sanders still did play a little outside at Michigan. I don't see him doing that, but I think you get a lot of flexible skill sets. And with a coaching staff that has shown, through their time in Dallas, obviously Dan in Seattle and Atlanta, shown they can be creative. I'm just really curious to see like what they end up doing with these guys and how they best utilize all these different football players. I mean, because that's really what they are. They're not DBs. They're football players, and th're really good football players. So that's going to be something that I'm really, really excited to watch over the course of OTAs, minicamp, and training camp. Is what shape does this thing take? What packages are they used in? Because you could draft Sanders still and have him be kind of like your 3rd and 10 nickel player, right? Or your kind of sub nickel player, right? And Jeremy Chin could be in the box, and Luvu could be a defensive end, and Bobby Wagner could be on the sideline, and like you could just. And then maybe the other 3 rushers are defensive tackle. You could do a bunch of stuff, but we got to figure out who is best at what. And it's still so early in the process. But I think the ultimate thing I come back to is you get a guy in Sanders still, and you talked about like his football character's like off the charts. Like Saban said the same thing, best pound for pound player in the country type of stuff, right? And when you watch the film, that's what you see: a guy who can blitz, a guy who can tackle, a guy who's got great coverage instincts and great footwork. So I say to myself, I want him on my team. We'll figure out how to use him. And I really think it kind of falls in this bucket of, we're not drafting for need. We're drafting best player available. And I think he was the best player available at the time. I think it was the same thing for Johnny Newton. And I think you just get two really good football players that fit your kind of pedigree and what you wanted to identify in terms of people. And you say, we'll figure out how to use them when they get here.
He's the most Commanders player on the board. Like for what they want the Commanders to be. And all the things that we've talked about with the character and why they love Jaden and why they love these other guys that we're talking about. Like nobody embodies that better than Mike Sanders still. And I think I heard it was Nate Tice talking about the Brock Bowers pick that I thought he made a really good point on the Athletic Football Show, where he said, at first you're like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense because you don't really need a tight end. You just drafted Mayer, like, what are you doing? But there's so many times that we do that on draft day. Then a year later, we look at what a team could have done, and it's like, oh, they passed on the best player available who's now killing it somewhere else. They should have just taken the best player available. And that's why you do it, is because the league changes so fast. And, a year from now, Chin's on a 1-year deal. Maybe they look at Forrest and Butler and they're like, these aren't our kind of guys, which I have no reason why they'd think that based off what we know of them necessarily going in. But like, who knows? That's the point. The point is we don't know what it's going to be a year from now. What we do know is on the board in front of us right now is this guy that we think is a really, really talented football player that is the ultimate character guy from what we want. So just take him. Like, don't overthink that, where are we going to play him? Nickel, outside? What does that mean for this guy, that guy? Like, yes, you need a plan. And I think that, the classic like Puka Nacua example of what happens when you have a plan for a guy, and that plan, that's the best possible outcome of having a plan for a guy. But at the end of the day, if you've got a glut at a certain position, and unless it like quarterback and what Atlanta did with Penix is a whole different conversation. Yeah. So take quarterback out of it. As long as it's not quarterback.
And honestly, even with that, like, I kind of get it. You know what I mean? I kind of get it, but like we'll talk about that more on a different show.
Yeah, we can talk about that on Thursday. I think it's I get what they're trying to say. It's an indefensible decision. But anyway, like
I'm going to defend it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, outside of quarterback, don't worry about having too many of a good thing. We've seen it too much in the NFL, and Mike Sanders still is the obvious correct pick there for them. At 50. Ben Sinnott, 53. Now we get to have the football discussion about him, the Kansas State tight end / H-back / everything. He lined up in the slot. He lined up outside. And I thought it was really interesting that Adam Peters invoked Kyle Juszczyk's name. He said he blocks like Kittle, too. He said he blocks like both those guys, but it does feel like this could be his Kyle Juszczyk, who he takes in round 2 here. What do you see from him on tape, and how versatile can he be in the NFL?
Yeah, first off, I don't think anybody blocks like George Kittle, but I do think like when
I didn't say it. Adam Peters did. Yell at him, Logan.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I think the thing about Ben Sinnott is that I understand the comparison with both those guys. So like when I first watched Ben Sinnott, I had the same exact idea. I was like, this is Kyle Juszczyk. He's a guy that can play fullback. He can line up outside. He can beat linebackers in one-on-one situations. Because the cool thing about having a guy like that on your roster, right? So like what makes Kyle Juszczyk such a wonderful chess piece is that defenses have to match that personnel with base defense. Unlike two tight ends where they can match you in nickel, if you have a fullback in the game because of run fits, you need to add another run defender. So if he wants to, if Ben Sinnott can play that H-back, fullback, tight end hybrid role, it's going to do wonders for your run game, like right off the bat, right? And then you say, well, now you've matched in base defense, and now I have a player in Ben Sinnott who I can line up in the slot or line up out wide, and I have a very high degree of confidence that they can beat a linebacker or a safety in one-on-one situations, right? And again, like he's got to grow and develop into that role, but I love that pick because of that reason. And then when you go to the Senior Bowl, I think this is one of the benefits of going to the Senior Bowl and seeing these athletes there, is he blocks better in line than I thought. Like he didn't really do it a ton at Kansas. Like not that he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it a ton. But seeing him block big ends and like throwing his face in there and playing with that physical edge and then running his routes and able to create some separation at the top, like because his route tree at Kansas State was kind of like these seams and kind of languid corners, which worked for the concept, but you didn't see the suddenness, right? And so I saw a more sudden mover. I saw a guy that was competitive in the run game. I saw a guy that was physically tough. And again, if he can grow into that role that Adam Peters described, physically he looks like he can. Like physically, like right off the jump in terms of how they used him in college, it's not like a big jump, but talk about a piece that would be awesome in terms of dictating matchups with personnel, dictating responses from the defense with personnel, and a guy that I think has significant pass game upside. It's really exciting. And again, you look at what Zach Ertz brings as a receiver, and this is something totally different because of the down and dirty approach that you get from that player. It forces different adaptations from the defense. So it's a very exciting pick, I think, a guy that I liked a lot coming out. And I think, people say, oh, well, look, Logan, you had Jared Wiley ahead of him, right? But I think for what this team needs and the way he described the role, taking him here makes 100% sense because Jared Wiley doesn't fit that role. Theo Johnson doesn't fit that role.
No.
This is the guy that fits that role.
I also think it's interesting because for as much as people associate like 10 personnel with Cliff and people are like, they need more receivers, and they obviously got one, but they need more receivers because they're going to be 4 wide. It's like, no, as you look at Cliff's last 3 years in Arizona, they played in 12 a lot. And the funny thing about Sinnott is like when he's out there, are you in 12 or are you in 21? Like that's the beauty of it,
21.
right? Like, do you
And
count
he
him
does
as a
have enough
fullback?
he does have enough pass game upside, I think, to kind of be in that kind of even 11 range. You know what I'm saying? It's a very unique piece.
But as a
because of
defense,
the
like you
matchups.
have to make that determination, which is exactly what you were saying, right? Is like, is he a fullback? Like, we don't know before they break the huddle. We can't really, have a linebacker and a cornerback waiting there to see whether we should match with our nickel or go to base. So we probably treat it like 21 most of the time. But that's the thing. Is like Cliff used 12 personnel a ton. And Sanat now gives you even more versatility within that 12/21 personnel because of who he is. And I think Cliff will definitely lean into that in the ways that Kyle Shanahan has with Kyle Juszczyk. So, just adding to kind of that chess piece thing, because people don't associate that kind of stuff with Cliff. Like, I actually think Cliff has shown that already, and nevertheless, will continue to evolve with that here in Washington.
Yeah, 100%. And again, when you watch him in 2021, like Max Williams, the guy from Minnesota, he went to Minnesota College. He was drafted by Baltimore, but they used him kind of like a fullback. The problem with Max Williams is he's like 6'6", like 265. So some of those insertion blocks, some of those counters were just tough for him to move around and make those blocks. And I think with Ben Sanat, because he's a better athlete, he's a little bit more compactly built, he can do that stuff a little bit more reticently. So maybe that package expands, So again, I think it's a wonderful pick. I think it fits the role, especially when you describe the role. There was no better player in this draft to fill that role, and I see the value there in the second round for sure.
Logan, they didn't address tackle, or did they? That is the question with Brandon Coleman, the offensive lineman out of TCU. And reading his scouting report is so interesting to me because most of the time when you look at guys who played some tackle, played some guard, it's like, he's not athletic enough, his arms aren't long enough. Like, there's obvious reasons why people project these guys inside to play guard. Brandon Coleman is a phenomenal athlete, pretty physically gifted, and he just happened to play a lot of guard, and maybe he struggled in space. Like, you can tell me based off the tape why you think he maybe bounced inside outside and where you would project him. But I think the idea that they didn't address tackle, people might be speaking too soon here because when they put out the Instagram post, for whatever it's worth, it said Brandon Coleman, offensive tackle, as the draft pick at 67.
Yeah, and like you said, this guy was a really interesting evaluation because he's like a wide-hipped, kind of wide-backed. Like when you see him, he screams guard. He wears like a big neck brace cowboy collar thing. He doesn't really, because he's got this thing on. He plays
neck roll.
Yeah, he plays his face off, right? He's physical. He's got heavy hands, all this stuff. So you're like, dude's going to be a great guard, right? And then when he was drafted, they were like, oh, he's a tackle. Like they were very specific. He's a tackle. He's a tackle. He's a tackle. I was like, well, I'm going to go back and watch all his tackle reps. And so I watched the game. I think it was not the national championship game, but the semifinal game from 2022 where he's playing against Michigan. And again, really good athlete. In space is like, I thought it was going to struggle, but he has a really good feel for the pass protection line, right? And so one of the things about having a good feel for that is like he can angle set at a really nice level because he's pretty quick, right? I don't know if he's got the hip flexibility to do like a straight vertical set, but really good feel for the line, heavy hands, and uses his arm length really well. And his feet are pretty good. So when I was watching him, I was like, man, this guy kind of reminds me of like DJ Humphries a little bit. He's not like the tallest guy in the world. He's not like he doesn't look like a traditional tackle necessarily, but like he has the length and the foot speed to get it done. So again, really interesting eval. He played guard at the Senior Bowl. I actually thought he had better reps at tackle, honestly, when I watched him play. Like he just looked more comfortable there. And again, going back and watching his tackle stuff, I was like, maybe. Like to me, he screams Sam Cosmi to me. Like when I watched him, like he can play tackle, but is going to be a better guard. But because of the length that he's got, Cosmi's got 33 and an eighth inch arms, so a little shorter arms. Because of the length, it makes you think, well, maybe he can survive there. In addition to how he pass sets, he's got this great thick lower half, and he can sit on some of the power rushes. And because he's got such heavy hands, he can disrupt rushers well. And then once they're disrupted, even though he's in a bad spot, he can kick back and recover at a high level. So I'm really, again, I think great football character, plays the game you want to play it. In terms of role, I don't hate the tackle thing now. Like I think you definitely got to see how it looks and see how it plays. But the athlete, I don't know how I missed it because I went to the combine. I didn't even know that he ran that fast. I didn't know that he jumped that high. I didn't know that he was measured that long. And then you couple that with the interview process, you say, well, shoot, maybe he's got something here. So obviously you got to see how he looks against, NFL pass rushers. But I think he checks a lot of boxes. And people say, oh, what about, Braden Daniels? He's a good athlete. This is a different type of athlete. Like when you watched Coleman, the pass protecting feel of not oversetting. So like not getting my hat past the midline of the rusher is right there. The timing of the punch is right there. Does it look always like let's say like Trent Williams? No, it doesn't. But it's functional. And that's something you should never sleep on with pass protection. Is if it's functional, there's a really good reason that it'll translate to the next level. It was one of the same things with Cosme. Like Cosme in college had this soft outside shoulder in pass protection. So you're always like, is he going to be okay versus longer, bigger rushers? Those deficiencies are not here with Coleman in the same way. So again, there's not a ton of reps, but the reps you do see, the feel, the timing, the positioning, and the ability to sync on power are all there. So maybe this is a guy that kind of grows up and fills out that tackle role for you. And he did play left tackle, so I think it's worth considering.
He did. He played a lot of left tackle, actually. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I think total snaps, he might have played more tackle than he did guard.
Oh, really?
At TCU. I'll pull it up in a second. I'll ask you this question, then I'll start furiously typing. It's really not that hard. PFF has it all done up. I just got to log in. But when you look at the strategy element here in terms of they take Newton at 36, they're on the board at 40, and they've got options there. And at 50, I believe they still even had quite a few options because none of the tackles really went. There was such a run on tackles in the first round that all the tackles that were available in the second were available almost all the way into the third round. And so you had your Patrick Pauls, you had your Kingsley Suamatias, you had Roger Rosengarten, you had all these guys available. What do you make of them passing on all of those guys for Sandersill and Sanat, and then taking this flyer of a different kind on Coleman at 67, seeing what you've seen now of him and kind of watching him through that tackle lens?
So I think, Newton and Sandersill were definitely safer picks, right? They're definitely better football players. Their production was better in college. I think when you look at those guys, I think they get pushed up boards because offensive linemen, much like quarterback, get pushed up boards. And I was pushing them up my board because I thought, oh man, Kingsley Suamataia is a tremendous athlete, but technique is very inconsistent. The mental kind of consistency from him is very inconsistent. And you look at Patrick Paul, I think, has the potential to be something very special because of the measurables, but the hand placement, the footwork, very inconsistent. And then you look at Roger Rosengarten, who again played right tackle at UW, extremely talented from a footwork standpoint, but 33-inch arms. That's always a little bit of a concern. Would be making the transitional left. So, okay, I don't love that. And then Kieran Amadiji from Yale has all of this tremendous upside, but has only played 3 games last year coming off a quad injury, and is coming from Yale. So when you look at those guys, you're kind of I like the package that they're in. I like the physicality that they bring. But in terms of the production on the field, it's not always there. There's a lot of growing that needs to do. So if they brought one of those guys in, I'm like, shoot, well, good thing Lucas is here because I think there's the development course for them is significant, right? With Brandon Coleman, it's a little bit different.
Same thing. In a different way, but thank God Lucas is here, but we got another development project and we have no questions about the finish and the nastiness and all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right. So when you look at that stuff, you say, okay, well, he's going to play hard. He's got honestly, in the tackle reps that I've seen, which is probably 150. So, there's more, but probably about 150. They're good. They're consistent. You know what I mean? And that level of consistency is not always there for those other guys. So his ceiling might not be the same, might not be Patrick Paul, who's one of the biggest, most athletically imposing people I've ever seen, but his floor is much higher than Patrick Paul's, right? And so I think that's what you look at, right? If it doesn't work out, he could easily play guard. He could probably play center, right? He's a really good football player, wired the right way. And I think having that flexibility, even though it didn't initially come to me, is nice. And now it's got to work out. We'll see what happens when they get into training camp. But I do think there is value there. And I feel better about it having watched more film of him and kind of seeing some of the stuff that, again, he's got to hit. It's got to work. But the guard tackle flexibility, the maturity that he shows on film, and the consistency are things that get me excited.
So whatever it's worth. 2021 he played mostly guard. He played 19 snaps at left tackle, 432 at left guard, 26 at right guard. In 2022, he played 1,007 offensive snaps. 999 of them were at tackle, 2 at right tackle, 997 at left tackle, and only 3 at guard. That is also his highest graded season per PFF. So he graded an overall grade 2022, playing almost exclusively, 99.5%, literally. Actually, probably it's like 99.8% at tackle, graded 79.6. In 23, he split 465 reps at left tackle, 255 at left guard, and his overall grade dropped to a 57.7. So, for whatever it's worth, this one season he played at left tackle almost exclusively was his best season per PFF. So he's got way more tackle experience than guard experience overall, and it seems like that's where he's better suited.
And I think, and again, that consistency with the pass set is very encouraging. And then I can't overstate, like, he's a physical SOB. Like, he wants to get after you and wants to mess you up. So I'm going to bet on that. I don't want a guy that – I had a conversation with an online coach who said sometimes I don't know, like, they draft these guys who are really good in pass protection, but they can't run block, and they're out of the league. And there's no question that he can do both of those things. It just depends on where you think he's better suited at the NFL level.
All right, last but not least, and again, we'll do the late round guys and the UDFAs and some other thoughts from the draft on the late week pod. But Luke McCaffrey out of Rice, wide receiver, played quarterback at Nebraska, transferred to Rice, converts to wide receiver. Yes, his brother's Christian. Yes, his dad is Ed. And yes, it matters. Not in a nepotism kind of way, although he certainly benefits from growing up around it. But he grew up in a family that was hyper competitive, that had their dad as a Super Bowl champion as an example of the highest level. He's constantly competing with Christian, who's one of the best players in the league. And I think what's really interesting in listening to people talk about him and reading more about him and watching him play a little bit is, even though he's a converted quarterback, he is tough as nails. And this is not like let me go out here and try it because I'm a pretty good athlete thing. Like, this dude took a mentality to the wide receiver position, and he's continually gotten better. He's going to work really hard. He's got great resources, not only with what Washington is building in terms of their internal resources, but being able to go talk to Christian and his father about playing receiver in the NFL. Christian's obviously a running back, but lines up out there a lot and is considered a wide receiver caliber, like a great wide receiver caliber route runner. This is an exciting upside play who, again, comes to you with the floor of character and competitiveness and all the things that Adam Peters has obviously known about because he's been with Christian in San Francisco for a long time.
Yeah, this guy feels to me like the perfect big slot, and what I mean by that is a guy that is like your third receiver and does all the dirty work. He'll crack a safety, he can run a choice, he's going to cut defensive ends and not even blink twice about it. I think he also has some return upside in terms of the new return rules because you're trying to run kind of gap scheme downhill runs. He'll play gunner on teams. Again, the physicality when he catches the football, the physicality when he's blocking is there. He's not like a murderer, but he's got to get in the way and work to finish. Like, there was a play, I think it was against Texas, where he kind of misses the block, circles back around, gets back in front of the guy, pushes him out of bounds, and the running back's able to cut off his butt. You know what I mean? And there's just kind of this never say die approach to his play style. And I think the thing, again, that you're betting on here is that, like you talked about, the resources, the pedigree, the way you watch him work, the way he improved, he's a guy with a tremendously high floor. And to me, just screams like Puka Nacua. That's what he screams. When you watch him, it's that type of player. He's going to do the dirty work. He's grounded through the catch point. He's got enough variation and releases now to be successful at the NFL level. But I think that package is just going to continue to grow as he matures at the position. So, I think he's going to be a fine pick. Again, he's got to grow and he's got to develop. But in terms of a floor pick, the floor is extremely high with him. I think the ceiling could be something special, and I think that's exactly what you're looking for in the third round.
Yeah, talk about production too. 6 touchdowns in his first year at receiver in 2022. Got up to 13 touchdowns in 13 games. Logan, I'm not very good at math, but I think he scored once a game.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the physicality, the blocking, the kind of that role that you again, we talked about Ben Sinnott and your ability to kind of say, what personnel are we in? It feels like the same thing with Luke McCaffrey. And so when you watch LA, for example, they're never in anything but 11. But Puka Nacua will go crack a linebacker for you now, right? He'll go stick his face on Roquan Smith, and they'll run an ISO with him doing that. I think Luke McCaffrey has an element of that. And again, I think he's got to get a little bit bigger for that full time. But, he's 200 pounds, get to 210, and start doing that role. But I think that mindset, in terms of that big slot mindset, is right there for you. And it allows you to, again, find personnel advantages with that type of toughness at that position.
And I think the positionless nature that we see the background of, Adam come from with Kyle as well, right? Like Debo, Kittle, and Juszczyk are the three guys in that San Francisco offense. And McCaffrey as well. I guess all four of those guys can kind of line up anywhere, but specifically Juszczyk, Debo, and Kittle, like, they'll line up in line. They'll line up as fullbacks. Like, they'll move those guys around. McCaffrey and Debo are interchangeable. Like, those interchangeable pieces were such a big part of what they're able to do schematically out there and create the advantage to the personnel like you're talking about. And it feels like they got in Sinnott and McCaffrey, two guys to try to replicate that in whatever version Cliff wants to do. So it's going to be really fun to watch. Obviously, we will do so first in training camp or mini camps, which come up in just a couple of weeks. Rookie mini camps like 2 weeks away. Then the OTAs and all that. And then August comes and we get to see it quote unquote for real, training camp for real. And then September suddenly will be here before we know it. That's it, and that's all for this edition of Take Command. We'll talk about the final 3 draft picks and some of the UDFAs later on in the week. We can also talk about our winners and losers from the rest of the NFL with the draft, and then we're in silly season, Logan. Then I don't know what we're gonna do. We did podcasts last year around this time. We did stuff. You guys liked it. You kept listening. So we'll figure out what we did last year and we'll do it again. Just the 2024 version. In the meantime, thanks for listening. If you are new and you are just checking us out for the first time, then hit that subscribe button. We're here twice a week in your podcast feeds. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time on Take Command.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.